Amazing that with a diversity of 198 countries all over the earth, we find a common ground, a common problem, solving.
President Barack Obama
The decade of war is now ending.
Hindi ba dapat kasama namin kayo sa corruption?
But in a world married to the Washington Consensus, with its neoliberal market principles, what future does it hold? Poverty, hunger, development, these are world problems. How do we solve all these? Good to know that the Washington Consensus offers development lending to the world's poorest countries. The World Bank and the IMF share the same goal of reducing poverty. While the IMF focuses on macroeconomic issues, providing policy advice and technical assistance, the World Bank concentrates on poverty reduction and long-term economic development, helping countries implement projects such as building schools, fighting disease, providing water, providing electricity, and protecting the environment. These institutions are here to promote shared prosperity and greater equality, yet 1 billion people still live in destitution and inequality is still rising. Through its work, the bank seeks to strengthen the economies of borrowing nations by imposing conditionalities. These conditionalities are the commitments contained within a loan that developing countries must adhere if they are to receive all or part of the funding. Essentially, conditionalities are economic reforms requiring structural adjustments, trade liberalization, and the privatization of essential services such as telecommunications, energy, water, and banks. According to Eurodad, their study revealed that the World Bank and the IMF are often pushing for the same privatization conditions in poor countries. 50% of the recipient countries felt that the World Bank introduced elements that were not part of the country's program into their loan conditions. Paradoxically, impoverished countries are not only faced with unacceptably high and rising number of conditionalities, but they are also pressed to comply with these policy reforms so they could receive their development grant. Interestingly, while the top investors of the World Bank comes from developed countries, Australia, Sweden, Spain, Norway, Japan, Canada, France, United Kingdom, Germany, and the top United States, investing billions of their national income, studies reveal that the top debtor states, Ireland, Spain, Netherlands, most of them are in fact also the top investors of the World Bank. But the world debt does not only circulate within these countries. World debt is spread in every region in the world. For almost 40 years, the Philippine government has greatly depended on the foreign loans from the IMF and the World Bank. Historically, the country has followed an economic development that is export-oriented but import-dependent and foreign investments-led. And while economic growth is commonly measured in terms of increases in GDP and GNP, the crisis has manifested itself primarily in the ballooning of the country's foreign debt and balance of payment deficits. As a result, the economy has been running based on deficit spending. To address the country's economic crisis, the government has consistently viewed foreign loans as a reliable and effective solution. But studies have revealed that SAPs have worked against the interests of people of debtor countries, resulting to worsening conditions and gross violations of human rights. Since the principal objectives of SAPs have been efficiency and economic growth, poverty alleviation and income distribution become secondary concerns. Analysts contend that SAPs and other neoliberal policies have not only neglected structural concerns of third world countries, but have also produced widening polarization and rising social costs in many countries. While the exigencies of the free market have been given priority, the focus have been on improving market efficiency and macroeconomic conditions. Thus, development issues like equity, income distribution, poverty alleviation have been subordinated. Neoliberal policies contained in SAPs like cuts in real wages, education expenditures continue to generate high social costs, especially for the poor and other disadvantaged groups.
In 1961, Gustavo Macapagal departed from the nationalist policies of predecessor Carlos Garcia. Instead, he embraced free enterprise and opened doors for free investment. As a return, the IMF and World Bank offered huge loans. It was thought that the foreign capital could be a catalyst for development. This was, however, our entry into the debt trap. External debt of the Philippines increased heavily starting at the time of President Marcos so as to finance domestic expansion and reforms. When Corazon Aquino replaced Marcos in 1986, the country's external debt increased to $28 billion. At the time of President Fidel Ramos, the external debts increased widely because of the volatility of peso-dollar exchange rate. The peak of the country's external debt was reached in 2003, which is about $57.6 billion US dollars. This phenomenon led to a fiscal crisis with huge amount of deficit.
Huwag ninyo naman sana kaming hadlangan. Hindi ba dapat kasama namin kayo sa reformang ito?
The Philippines has prioritized debt servicing over other public expenditures and has caused the relative neglect of the basic social services like providing quality education and better health care. This concept is called the social debt, where the state has unfulfilled obligations to its citizens based on its commitments in the Constitution and standards set by the UN. The country has constantly prioritized debt servicing since the time of the first Aquino until the present administration. As of the current budget, the Philippine government has allocated 763.249 billion pesos in debt service. That takes up about 29.29% of the current budget, while other important services like health and education takes the back seat. In education, there is the constant lack of necessary resources like teachers, chairs, books, and classrooms. A common scenario in the Philippines is that a book is shared by 3 students, and a teacher teaches 65 students. In Udalo Elementary School, there is only 1 classroom available for 647 students. 71,325 students in over 700 schools across the country have no classrooms and resort to conducting classes outdoors or in corridors. If the country abides by the UNESCO standard of 6% of GNP provision, the Philippine government has an accumulated education debt of 3.56 trillion pesos from 1986 to 2011. In health, the most common problems are out-of-pocket financing and unequal distribution of facilities. The most important concern is that the burden of healthcare spending falls mostly on private households as out-of-pocket payments, with a share of over 48% of total healthcare expenditure. The prevalence of out-of-pocket payments as the main source of health financing points to a serious inequity in the health financing system. Sadly, the PhilHealth enrollments of the poorest households, the household that needs it the most, has not been sustained during 2005 to 2010. This over-reliance on OOP spending means that poor households are more vulnerable than the rich. They are more prone to illness, and their OOP payments are relatively larger. In terms of facilities, the average bed-to-population ratio of the country is 1.07 bed per 1,000 population. Although this ratio meets the standard of the DOH, it is unequally distributed across the country. Urban-based hospitals such as those found in NCR and Region 4A has more facilities. Meanwhile, Regions 13 and ARMM have the least number of health facilities and beds in the whole country. If we go by the WHO standards of 5% of the GDP for health, the Philippine government has an accumulated health debt of 4.8 trillion pesos from 1986 to 2011. The Philippines' dependence on borrowings and prioritization of debt service over other public expenditures has stood in the way of the state's fulfillment of its obligations to its people. The budget allocated for debt payment could have been used to better serve the Filipinos.
In 2005, there are 60 countries needing total debt cancellation in order to meet the MDGs. Since 1996, which is the start of the Highly Indebted Poor Countries Initiative, only 20 countries have received significant debt relief, including the impoverished states of Benin, Burkina Faso, Niger, Uganda, Tanzania, and Mozambique, who remain to be poor because creditors continue giving small amounts of debt relief occasionally and with tough conditions attached. This is known as the drip-feed approach, which has fueled the debt crisis even more. Now, talks of debt repudiation have surfaced. Compared to debt default, which is the failure to repay a loan or interest on a loan when due, debt repudiation is the refusal to acknowledge a debt. This differs from default as it is the refusal to pay rather than the inability to do so. What are the costs and benefits of debt repudiation? Costs arise because creditors are very particular with their money, and any investor voluntarily lending money expects to be repaid the loan and to receive interest on the respective due date. This greatly affects a country's creditworthiness, and any borrower perceived to be less creditworthy will be demanded a higher return or interest rate to compensate for the perceived risk of non-repayment. But scholars argue that the benefits outweigh these costs. Debt repudiation would greatly help in lifting people out of poverty by being able to supply the simple economic necessities of a country, because instead of allocating for debt servicing, it will be given to more roads, schools, and healthcare for the country.
What if we repudiate our debt? What are its implications? We have to understand that most of our debt comes from the Marcos era, which were mostly stolen and made into white elephant projects that never benefited the Filipino people. In fact, it is only in 2025 that we will finish paying it off. This has created unsustainable burden for Filipinos in the past, in the present, and in the future. Foreign debt lang ang
walang forever. Dahil
the government has the capacity to review our borrowing policies to prevent accumulating unsustainable debt.
walang forever. Dahil
We can push for a longer-term vision for building up domestic capital.
dahil
And we can assess legitimate and payable debt against illegitimate and unpayable debt. Doing all these will enable us to negotiate with creditors for the possibility of partial debt repudiation. The loss of creditworthiness is only a short-term cost.
Di ba totally nga mukuan dito sa utang, no?
okay.
Kasi tinuod man sa pagkadinobili na ito kaya. Ang importante lang, ang conditionalities fair ba?
Alleviating our people out of poverty. Providing basic services should not be sacrificed for the benefit of our credit rating. Ultimately, what matters to investors is the economic stability a country can provide.
Sa natitirang 2 taon ng Pangulo, umaasang ilang kritiko na may papakita ng Pangulo ang determinasyon sa laban sa katiwalian, sino man ang tamaan.
According to the dependency theory, the current world system proves only to be advantageous to first world developed countries. The current neoliberal global economic order, as propagated by institutions such as the IMF and World Bank, serves only to maintain the status quo, a system that uses democracy as the guise to further the exploitation of the global south. It is a wonder how the supposed equality of treatment among debtor countries, developed and developing countries alike, yield varying results across countries.